Love you for a very long period of time, and I appreciate you being here. Appreciate your support. And it's just, again, another milestone, I think, in the development of what we're trying to accomplish. So I appreciate you being here. Those of you I haven't had an opportunity to meet, I'm looking forward to meeting you and getting to know you, but I want all of us to get to know each other. So we're going to kick off the first presentation, and I'm so thrilled to have Heather Himmelberger here with us. She has been a jewel in putting this program together. She has worked with Way and really introduced us to some key players in the industry internationally. If you'll turn to page 5, you can see her bio. Very impressive, and I've had a number of Zoom meetings with her in putting this thing together, and I'll tell you, I get excited every time because of her passion for water. She's got 35 years of experience in the water and wastewater industry, and she's worked throughout the country on working with utilities and putting training programs on and helping them develop asset management plans. Has a BS from Penn State and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins. She's director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and so I'm really excited about her presentation. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. So Heather, if you will.
Hi everybody, good morning, and thank you Tom for the introduction. And I've been in this asset management world for about a couple of decades now, and one of the things that's always gotten me is, as we talk about asset management, it kind of gets more and more amped up. And asset management is really just a thought process. And the first time I ever went to an asset management training, it was EPA, Steve Albee putting on his Tom's Bad Day. So hands up, anybody remember the Tom's Bad Day training? So there's a couple of us around. I still remember that, Tom's Bad Day. And Tom really had an awful, awful day. So it was 2 days of just hearing poor Tom, just all this stuff going wrong. And it really clicked with me that, hey, really all this is applied common sense. It's using your head. So, that's what the heart and soul of asset management is. But over time, we get caught up in there's CMMS systems and asset management systems and SCADA systems and the Internet of Things and machine learning and digital twins and asset management plans and strategic asset management plans. And we kind of get all bogged down and the thinking part gets lost. So we get so caught up in all this technology and all these things you can do and how sophisticated you can make it, that the beauty of asset management is getting lost in all this complexity, and we need to kind of strip that away and get back to what asset management is all about, because we haven't really had as much success as I would like in the water and wastewater world. We've been pushing the boulder up the hill for about 20 years now, and I think we've made great progress. And I always say I look back at a glass that's half full, because we've made tremendous progress from where we were. But the glass is still really half empty if I look forward, because I think there's still a long, long way we have to go. And maybe if we get back to the basics, it can help us make some steps forward. So 2 foundations of asset management that I think are super important are this one, that just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we have to. We get so caught up in generation of operator after generation of operator just passing down. Well, we always do it like this. We do this every month or every week or every year. This is how it gets done. And I think we need to get back to the idea that it doesn't have to be the way we've always done it. We have to open our minds to there could be a better way of doing something. And the other one is using asset management as a process where you ask questions, make connections, and solve problems. And really, that's what we want to do with asset management. If there wasn't a benefit, I always tell every class I teach, if there wasn't a benefit to asset management, I wouldn't be here. Just because I could make a buck wouldn't be enough of a reason. I have to have passion and belief in what I do. So there has to be something, there has to be a carrot, reason you're doing this, and the benefits is why you're doing it. So we hope we can solve some problems, we can make a difference. So if we start asking questions and make some connections between different parts of asset management, we can solve problems that people are having. So I'm going to give you several examples of just how we can get places with just simple, asking questions and digging in a little deeper, again, to sort of make asset management not this grandiose thing, but just a collection of how we can solve problems and how we can make life better. So this is an example. All these are real-world examples. So we were doing an asset management program for a wastewater utility, and I always involve every level of an organization in the work we do in asset management, so they should feel free to come talk to me anytime they want. And this wastewater line crew member came in to the office where I was sitting in their facility and kind of slumped in this chair, all dejected, and he says, we clean this sewer line every month, year after year after year. It's such an awful job. We just did it yesterday. I hate it. Why can't we do something different? Why does it have to be like this? So I said, hey, why does it have to be like this? Explain to me the problem. Why are you guys out there every month? So he said, there's a sag in the line. It's in the downtown area. The restaurants, discharge too much fats, oils, and grease. It clogs up in the line. And we've learned over time, if we don't do it every month, there's going to be sanitary sewer overflows, or there's going to be backups. People are going to be mad. So we have to clean it every month to keep from getting angry customers. So, the triple bottom line issues they face, the cost of these monthly cleanings they have to do. And then it turns out that if they don't have people stationed at the treatment plant that this went to, it's a packaged treatment plant that this particular line flowed to, and it didn't normally have people there all the time. The operators kind of come and go just to run the place, but if they weren't there at the time they pushed this fatberg through, it caused violation at the plant. So there was potential violation at the plant, potential overflows, and they had to dispose of the fats that they were pulling out of the plant. And on the social side, real big job frustration. I mean, you can imagine, it's just like any parent cleans the house after their kids, and then 2 minutes later the house is, destroyed again. That's kind of the way they felt. We clean this thing every month. It doesn't make anything any better. You just have to go clean it again the next month. And I coined this, the PIA factor, the pain in the ass factor, is super high. The opportunity cost, so every month they're spending almost the entire day, 6 hours at a time, four-man crew. Their truck that they would normally be using, CCTV, is now being used for this, so there's a high opportunity cost. This particular utility had only CCTV'd 6% of their lines, and they were under a consent order that they're supposed to do all of their lines in, I forget exactly how many years, but they're nowhere near where they need to be. Well, this is part of that is the opportunity cost. Your crew is doing something else instead of what you want them to do. And then they have to disrupt traffic every month. So as you're cleaning, you're blocking off traffic in a downtown area. So I threw it back to him, well, is there anything else you can do besides cleaning a pipe? Do you have any other solution? And of course, the obvious solution is we can fix the pipe. That we could replace that section of pipe, we could fix it so we don't have the sag in the line, we don't have this fats, oils, and grease problem. So, what data will we have to have? We can't just go forward, which I explained to him, and say, I hate this job, replace the pipe. We have to go forward with a case to the upper management and say, well, why should we make a different decision? It can't be emotional, it has to be data-driven. So we would need data about, how many man hours do you use, the trucks that you use, the cost of those, the man hours at the plant, and the cost at the plant. Then on the other side, we need to know how much pipe are we going to replace and what's the full cost of that replacement, and then how many years payback would there be one way or the other. So the cost of the cleaning is about $15,600 a year, and the cost of replacement would be $37,800. You can probably already guess where we're going. So 2.4 years they're going to pay for the pipe. So they had already been doing this at least 10 years. Nobody knew exactly how long ago they started, but he knew for at least 10 years they've been doing this. There was no end in sight. So this was not on a 10-year CIP anywhere, so it would have been at least another 10 years. So how many times have they paid for the pipe and the cost of the cleaning? And you think of how many miles of pipe they could have CCTV'd. So if you figure 1 day a month, 12 days a year times 10 years, that was already 120 days of CCTV. Like how many miles could they have done? And then going forward, how many miles are they going to lose out? So clearly the best option for them would be replacing the pipe. And I am happy to say it is on the capital plan, the short-term capital plan, and they will be doing it sometime in the next year or so. So what keeps people from making these kinds of decisions? So this one seems so obvious, like why wouldn't you just have made that choice? But it hadn't been made until, this happened to, be a conversation we had in an asset management setting. So I think a lot of it is lack of asking questions, people not feeling comfortable and empowered to ask those questions. So somebody has to bring it up before it's going to change. So we have to get people empowered to ask the right questions. But then on the other side, we have to listen to them. So when somebody brings a question forward, we can't poo-poo it. We have to listen to them. And then we have to get data to analyze the situation. So we don't want it to, again, be an emotional thing. We want it to be a data-driven thing or a data-informed idea. And then I think another big one is viewing operational and capital dollars and activities differently. So the cleaning is an operational expense, and the replacement is a capital expense. And those are two different budgets. They're two different parts of the organization. And sometimes that becomes a barrier because we have money that's not exactly shifting, because we're not going to take the operational money and put it over here in capital, but we're going to use that operational money for something else. We're going to CCTV or something else with that money. So it's a little bit funny the way the whole thing works when we're talking operational capital, and that kind of gets in our way sometimes of making decisions. But the big one, we'll go back to this, is we get so caught up sometimes in how we've always done things, like that's just what we do, we clean the pipe every month, that gets in our way of doing something better. And I think when we talk about buried assets especially, so I work in both vertical and horizontal assets, but in buried assets I think the simplicity is even more important. We can't see these assets. We're not able to touch them and look at them and inspect them very easily. So we have to build from whatever we do have, and we have to get really comfortable with the idea that we don't know all that we want to know. And we almost never will. So we have to really get more creative with how we're going to get data, how we're going to use data, and kind of make decisions on the best data we have and just go forward. And I think we need to remember that our pipes are telling us a story, and we just have to listen. So sometimes we're not paying enough attention to what information our pipes are trying to give us. So we need to listen to these stories. So here's an example. That's me walking along there. You see the X where they have spotted for a pipe repair. You can see the pavement cut. And lo and behold, as you're going along here, there's a bunch of them. So what is this pipe, trying to tell us? We're here in a tiny stretch of line with a whole bunch of breaks that they fixed. So this pipe is telling us something. And this is a time-lapse GIS thing. So I'm going to play it, and you'll see little blue dots. Let me make sure it's playing here. Yeah, so you see the little blue dots, that's breaks. So this is over a course of a couple months. So you'll watch little blue dots coming up, and the faster they come up means the faster the time has been between the breaks. So you see the blue dots coming up here. And we could use this data to kind of tell us what's happening in this pipe over time and how are these dots filling in. Let me see if it's still going. So now we can kind of get a time lapse that we could add to our understanding of the pipe. And then we could add a bit more context. So how does this pipe look compared to other pipes? And it turns out, other than one line, this pipe is the worst pipe that they had in the system in terms of number of breaks. So we can go back to our original picture and say, what story is the pipe telling us? So what is this pipe trying to get across to us? And I think one of them is the pipe repair is not effective. So we're going back. Same sort of thing, we're going back over and over again. The pipe breaks, we fix it. The pipe breaks, we fix it. Nobody's stepping back a little further and saying, does this make any sense? Like we fix it and it breaks again. So I actually told him, like, why bother fixing it? Just let that one run until you get around to replacing it, because it's not doing any good. It just breaks somewhere else. The pipe is definitely getting worse. It's one of the worst pipes in the whole system, and you just have to give it up. It's time to replace the pipe. You know, we've used as much life out of this pipe as you can, and it's time to look for a better decision and a replacement decision. So the pipe is trying to tell us that, but we have to be open. We have to listen to what the pipe is saying to us. So here's another one. We have lots of pipe, the same age, same size. We can't replace it all. What do we do? So this particular system had a ton of pipe, about 75 years old, which in their minds was, got to get it out. And I said, well, why, just because it's 75 years old, does it all have to come out? And they said, well, because it's 75 years old. Like, okay. And they said, we don't have enough money. It's all ductile iron pipe, 6-inch. I'm sorry, not ductile, cast. It's all cast iron pipe, 6 inches. 75 years old, and we're going to need, I don't remember the exact numbers of millions now, but it was a huge number of millions of dollars, and we don't have it. So we don't know what we're going to do. Kind of threw up their hands. So we said, well, what do we know? Well, it turns out that they have been collecting break data for 15 years, but it's just been this one guy sitting in the corner that nobody pays attention to, and he doesn't even know why he's putting it in there. So it's just been this database that he types the break data into, and it's not everything you would want, but it does have address data. It had the date they discovered the break. It had a work order number, the date repaired. So it had some really good information, but nobody's ever been paying attention to this guy sitting in the corner. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So he's over there, thankfully, typing data in. And so the strengths and weaknesses of the data, we had 15 years worth of data, which was great. We had some locational data. It turns out none of it was GIS related or, you know, XY coordinates, but at least it was addresses, so that gives us something. And the dates were available. And we did have pipe size through a code. It turns out on the weakness side, there were a lot of codes in the database, and nobody had any idea what they meant. So there was some columns we couldn't use at all because they had been lost to history. You know, as this thing had been passed down from one person to another, nobody remembered why certain things were in there. And there weren't any details about the breaks beyond the fact that they were there. But at least we had some good data. And they also had mapping, but it was this kind of mapping, a paper map, or I shouldn't say a paper map, a PDF of a paper map that was really hard to read, but at least they had it. They were as-built. So at least we had something. They didn't have any other GIS mapping at the time. They were very hard to read in many places, but again, they were there. So we did a little bit of adjusting of the PDFs to try to make them a little brighter. We made copies of them and kind of drew, you know, colored lines. So you can see this is not high-tech stuff here. And then we were able to do a geocoding thing where we took the addresses and put them on a map based on the addresses. So it's not like that's perfect, but at least we got dots on a map. And then we put the pipes on the map and moved the dots to where they were the closest to a pipe. So again, it's not perfect. It could be that it was on that pipe instead of that pipe, but we were able to at least do a pretty good job of putting dots on a map and matching them up to the pipes. And lo and behold, what you see is this is color-coded by the number of breaks in the pipe. And the blue is like very few breaks. So this 75-year-old 6-inch cast iron pipe, for the most part, is doing really well. And they don't have a lot of problems. They have 2 pipes of concern. And one of them, the pipe breaks were definitely increasing over time. So if you plot them by year, it was definitely getting worse. And another one, there was a lot of breaks around the curve. We've actually seen this in other systems where they've tried to put metal pipe around a curve, and it doesn't really like to do that. So in 2 cases, there were, you know, really bad pipes needed to come out. And then there was this area kind of there by the river that there were more breaks than the rest of the area. So we said, okay, if you replace the 2 really bad sections and then kind of keep your eye on the ones in this blue circle, you can probably replace way, way, way fewer, and you leave the rest alone. Like, why are we going to pull out pipe that hasn't broken in 15 years there's no need to do that just because it reached this magical age of 75. It's like we don't have to take it out back and shoot it. We can leave it in the ground. So instead of spending multi-millions of dollars, it was actually going to be a very inexpensive, and they were able to put this in their CIP and do those couple of pipes. So just by doing a little bit of analysis, they could get, a much better result. So we could make the story more interesting by saying, how did the pipe break? That would give us information. Which breaks relate to degradation? Because again, that's an age-related thing versus something else. So there's different data that we could add to the database to help the story the pipes are telling be a little more interesting. And we could also do more investigation in this blue area, like is it the soil? What's going on there? So another one is this utility that spent the same amount on small diameter pipe replacement, this is water pipe, for a long time, over 15 years, nothing changes. So they spend about $1 million or $2 million a year, which at the time was giving them about 1 mile or 2 miles of pipe replacement. So every year they spend this amount of money, but every year the number of breaks is about the same. So we looked, they were looking at, well, how can we do something different? How can we make a bigger impact? So it started out with boxes and boxes, I'm not kidding you, boxes and boxes of paper work order data. And unfortunately, that was all work orders. So every single thing, water and wastewater they did, because utility was both, was in these boxes of work orders. So you can just imagine how much paper. And the paper was real thin paper. So when you get a long box, there is a heck of a lot of paper in it. And that's why you work at a university, because it's a perfect job for a grad student. Because you can sit them in an office, they work cheap, and they work hard, and they're really good. So that was the job of a couple of grad students over several months to just literally open every single piece of paper looking for the mainline breaks so we could create a database. So we could create a database and a map of, what were the mainline breaks that were occurring in the system. So this data was great in that it was 15 years worth of data. Unfortunately, they switched from paper to electronic, which you might think is good, but there was pretty good reason to believe the paper data was actually better than the early electronic data, but they threw the paper away as soon as they got the electronic. So we lost that last year where they were switching over. We wanted to compare the paper to the electronic, and oh, that's out in the trash. So we unfortunately couldn't do that. There was a fair amount of detail if the person filling out the work order cared. There was a lot of bad handwriting, so it was hard to read it in all those cases. And then when they switched to electronic work orders, nobody told them, you should call something the same thing every time. So there was literally 27 different ways that they put mainline leak in the database. So you had to search 27 different terms to get all the mainline leaks. So it was great that they had electronic, but it didn't make things as wonderful as you might hope. So we plotted the breaks on a map, and their colors there, the colored dots relate to the type of pipe. And if you just look at the map, most of the dots are red and yellow, so we'll take everything else away. And it was about 80-some% were red and yellow dots. So this is just the red and yellow dots. If you look careful, or you look quickly at it, it looks like about half the dots are red and half the dots are yellow, and that's pretty close to being true. That's half the dots are red and slightly less than half are yellow. So if we look at the pipe type, this is pipe type colors. The blue is cast iron pipe, which is yellow dots. And the red is steel pipe, which is the red dots. Hopefully you can see an immediate problem. So half the breaks are on 5% of the pipe. So the steel is 5% of the system, it's half the breaks. Cast iron is over half the pipe, and it has a little less than half the breaks. So the break rate of steel was 10 times the break rate of any other pipe. So clearly, steel's the problem. They kind of intuitively knew that. And the engineers like to do things very neatly. I'm an engineer, I can plead guilty. We like things to be nice and neat. So what they did is start at one end of the system. Steel is bad, so it doesn't matter what steel pipe we take out. Let's just start at this end and do a whole nice contiguous mile of pipe. And then next year when we get another $1 million, we'll pick another nice contiguous mile of pipe that we can replace. But if you know anything about asset management, you know that we should be replacing things on a risk-based profile. We should be replacing the things that break the most and cause the biggest consequences, which might be a little tiny piece of pipe here and a tiny piece of pipe there and a tiny piece of pipe there. So I had to fight engineers pretty heavily because they did not want to go that way. They said, there's a lot more mobilization costs. We won't get a whole mile done. Yeah, but we're going to get a more important, maybe 3/4 of a mile done than you would get the mile done. And this is why nothing's changing, because you're not getting the right pieces. And the only thing that finally won them over is we said there's 85 miles of steel pipe. At your rate, it's going to be at least 40 years, maybe 50 years before you replace it all. And they kind of looked scared, like, oh God, it can't be that long. Like, it is, like that's where we're at. So that kind of changed their minds. And the good news is, in a 5-year period, 45% break reduction rate and $9 million in avoided costs. So that's real money. So we can add extra data. We can do more things. We can look at, what are we going to do with the saved money and things like that. But it's real important to just see these simple techniques can get us really far. So this was another one. We think we have a big problem with pipe breaks, but we don't have any way to analyze it. So their starting point was a physical map book. They had this book in the car, and guys just wrote on it. Actually, there were 2 books. So 2 different crew members had these books, and they would write notes. So the notes were great, but they're in the back of somebody's truck. They're not getting anywhere. And they also had, I highlighted here, a partial call log. So they started about 18 months before we worked with them. They started this call log system. And in the call log, it only was from 8 to 5. So anything that happened before 8 and after 5 was not included. And of course, nothing breaks after 5 or before 8. So that wasn't a problem at all. So we're thinking, okay, so we only know some of the breaks. So we had some data. We could take their maps. We made a GIS map. And we could put on the partial call log we could put on the map. So we did create a map with dots. And we started looking at areas that they thought were of concern, and the red circle was where they thought they had the biggest problem. So we wanted some more data, and we thought, where could we get some more data to add to the map? So literally, we went out looking at pavement cuts. They hadn't paved the roads in 20 years. So there were all these pavement cuts, and it was pretty easy to tell which ones were water and which ones were sewer based on where they were. By the directions, we could tell if they were service or main lines. And I tell people, anytime you want to know something about customers, from customers, you just put on an orange vest and stand in the street. Whoosh! What are you guys doing? Hey, you know anything about this pavement cut? When did this happen? Oh, it happened a couple years ago. It was messing up the trip I was supposed to take to the dentist or whatever. So we got some data that way, just kind of figuring out when things happened. And we could take pictures, and the one on the right just shows you can tell which direction your picture was taken when we use this app to take the pictures. So we could combine all the data together, our data from pavement cuts and their field data, to find out that the pipe just outside the area was actually the worst pipe, and it wasn't as bad in the area as they thought. And we also found one of the things that they had been ignoring is their main transmission main to the city. They had a long transmission main from their source to the city, and they were ignoring the breaks on that transmission main as like, this is a way bigger problem. This is a very, very small system that we were asked to work with them on asset management. But before we got there, they told us they'd already applied for $5 million to replace all the pipe in their system. And we're like, why are you replacing all the pipe in your system? Well, because it's old and it breaks a lot. And that was literally the answer. So we said, how old is it? I don't know, it's just old. Like, well, when did you put it in? Oh, about 25 years ago. Like, oh my gosh, we got a problem here. What's the condition of your pipe? Well, it's PVC, I don't know, it just breaks a lot. Like, well, how many breaks is that? I don't know, it's just a lot. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're going forward with $5 million when we don't have a clue what's going on. We don't know enough about the system, so should you actually be doing this? So we needed to find out, what data did they have. They had a paper map on the wall, so at least we had something to go by, and they had push pins for different assets. So what did their data actually show? We asked them, how could we find out about breaks? And they said, well, in the board minutes, we put down the breaks that occurred that month. So if you would read the board minutes, you could get information about the breaks. So, okay, let's get a couple years of board meeting minutes and look through those and see what the board meeting minutes show. And so what did it really show? It showed that they had 1 year 5 breaks and another year 6. So there was 11 mainline breaks in 2 years, which to me is not a lot. They had some service leaks. And then we asked, like, was there any information of why these pipes were breaking? Well, most of the time it was because they're shallow buried plastic pipe on dirt roads. People were cutting them. When they were digging and doing projects, they would cut into the pipe. So it had nothing to do with degradation. It had to do with bad spotting or not calling the one call place. And then there was one where you can see the bunch of blue dots together, and that was an elbow that went under the road, and it wasn't restrained, so it kept pulling apart. And the same thing of like all these other stories, all they did was push it back together again. So nobody ever restrained it. It was just push it back together and wait till it breaks again. So a big chunk of the breaks related to that. So when we asked them, you know, what do you want to do? And they said, well, we really need loop lines. We need to restrain the joint. We need some valves, some hydrants. They did a $50,000 project and put in the loop lines, a couple other things, and saved $4,950,000. I'm still waiting for my cut of that. And the whole point, then they said, hey, you know, our system works better. It's like, yes, because you were focused on customer service and other things and not this whole idea that if it's old and breaks a lot, you have to do, you know, a major replacement. So in all cases, we did use simple tools. It's not like we don't ever want to use computers or, you know, tools to help us, but mostly the whole time it was about the thinking. It was about thinking through what we're doing. It's about questioning. It's about that, you know, why are we doing it this way or that way? So it's really about, you know, just using simple processes to get us where we want to go. And we can use these simple ideas to build out an asset management program. So if we just go quickly back to that example of the SAG and we think through, you know, what is the basic components of asset management, you know, the service level you want to provide, the assets you have to do it, which ones are critical, you know, looking at the life cycle costing, and then the finances, which we call level of service, current state of the assets, criticality, life cycle costing, and long-term funding. We can set goals around things like cleaning. So we could set a goal that says, okay, we're going to do an analysis of the pipes that we clean often so we can see if their continued cleaning makes sense. We can look at asset inventory. What kind of data do you want to collect if you're going to analyze pipes? You know, what kinds of things do you want to know about them? And we can always add extra data points later if we're not collecting the right stuff. We can think through criticality and how does that pipe criticality work out. So in this case, I would say that the probability of failure, we usually do a 1 to 5 scale, would be a 5. It already failed because it's financially inefficient. So it's already had a failure mode. And the consequence was a 4 probably because we have these sanitary sewer overflows, backups, potential violations. So it would rank pretty high on criticality. And in the life cycle costing, we can think of all the interventions we can do throughout its life, one of which we need to replace the pipe before it has, you know, failed in the terms of an actual, like, physical failure. Maintain it in the meantime, and then we want to design changes in to prevent future SAGs. And then we should design and implement a FOGS program to try to keep the FOGS down in the pipeline and include that pipe in the capital improvement plan. Long-term funding, we need to include money in the capital improvement plan for that pipe replacement, and then use the cost savings for other things like CCTV work that they really needed to do. So we can start building out an asset management program and grow it from there. So as a wrap-up, you know, we can develop more robust asset management programs by working through these issues, and it doesn't have to feel so overwhelming and complex, because I think that stops a lot of utilities from moving forward, is they just feel this weight of asset management that just feels like they can't do it. It's too much, it's too overwhelming. And if we take some of that away, maybe they would be willing. And I think, you know, it's great to use all the tools that we need and that we want, but not lose sight of the thinking part. So the thinking part has to be the central, and the tools have to be ways that we help our thinking and only using tools that help that process, not something that gets in our way. We have to put this, every class that I use this slide, I always say, print this out and hang it on your wall. Because you really need to keep in mind that you have to keep open minds to other ways. I say it doesn't mean everything you're doing is wrong. We're not saying that. You may do an analysis and we may find out the cleaning is a better way to go. But we just need to question it. We need to do the data and we need to see where the right answer is. We want to ask questions, make connections, and solve problems with asset management because we want it to be something that helps us, that gives us benefits. And, you know, even though our pipe is underground and invisible, it can tell a story, and we just need to be willing to listen to the pipe. You know, what is it talking to us about? You know, what are those underground things telling us? Because if we're willing to listen, we can get some good information. So with that, I have my contact information up here. I'll be here through the whole conference. I love to geek out on asset management. As Ross knows, we geek out all the time on this stuff. So if you want to talk to me about anything you think in asset management, I would be thrilled to talk to you about it.
We have a couple of minutes. Anybody have a question you'd like to ask Heather? I'll just she'll be here so you can talk with her throughout the day and tomorrow. So if you have a question, okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I did actually do a TED Talk, not on this, but on cost of water. It was a fun experience. So if you ever get a chance to do a TED Talk, it's a ton of work. So you have no idea how much work you got to put into one of those things, but it was fun. So I did on cost of water. I was basically, it was to an audience of, you know, non-water people, but just telling them that they should care about their water and care to pay for it. Anything else? Mm-hmm.
Because you have, the mic. Yeah. Because you had so much data, did you also try doing some sort of predictive analytics to like predict when the breaks would happen in the future?
We haven't been able to say like precisely, you know, we think there's going to be 5 breaks on this line 5 years from now. What we've done is say, here's where the break patterns are, and I have not found a system yet, and if you have, please come talk to me, that there isn't a pattern. There always seems to be a certain area of the city that has more breaks or has more issues than another. And so what we usually do is say, okay, at what point have you had enough breaks per mile that the replacement makes sense over repairs? And predicting areas to watch, but we haven't yet gotten to the point where we've done like lots of machine learning or things to say, you know, breaks are going to happen in this many years. And we did one study with the city of Albuquerque where they were looking at a technology that was supposed to find like wall thickness, and the technology claimed to be able to predict when breaks would occur, and it was massively expensive. So they just did a like test case, and we watched the pipes for a long time, and there wasn't really any correlation. You know, like the breaks were more random than would be suggested. So, you know, I'm sure there are machine learning tools that are trying to predict that, but we haven't gone there yet. We were kind of more looking at, okay, at what point do we have enough breaks per mile that we say, okay, that pipe should be replaced. This one you can watch, you know, maybe another break or two and you'll take it out. But we never have gotten to like that one more year, that pipe is going to fail. I think that's a bit harder.
All right, very good. Thank
Well,
you,
thank you.
Heather.